Thank you, Martha. Good morning to you brave souls who... It's an easy drive. They take good care of the highways here, most of the time. So, anyway, welcome. One brief little thing, you'll notice in our order of service today, we have a couple of Christmas carols. And I know not everybody grew up in that tradition, or maybe they weren't a big deal for you. So this is a little bit of an indulgence on my part, because I remember carols from my childhood. And while I don't necessarily agree with all of the theology anymore, there's a feeling that goes with it. And so I appreciate that. Our opening words this morning, I have a couple of short pieces, because we are coming into the solstice and the sun return, which will be this coming Saturday. And these words are from Diane Lee Mooney. Again did the earth shift, and again did the nights grow short and the days long. And the people of the earth were glad and celebrated, each in their own ways. And the other one is an invocation and a blessing from Joe, J-O, Poor. Mother, Father, universal power, remind us daily of the sanctity of all life. Touch our hearts with the glorious oneness of all creation as we strive to respect all the living beings on this planet. Penetrate our souls with the beauty of this earth as we attune ourselves to the rhythm and flow of the seasons. Awaken our minds with the knowledge to achieve a world in perfect harmony, and grant us the wisdom to realize that we can have heaven on earth. "463 years ago, in January of 1556, Peter Ganesius publicly declared his anti-Trinitarian views during the General Synod of the Reformed Calvinist Churches of Poland, held in the village of Sickafoose. A synod, for those of you not up on your church lingo, is an ecclesiastical assembly of clergy and believers, sort of like our General Assembly. 3 months later, he was excommunicated. And so began a schism that culminates in June of 1565, when Peter, along with a number of other clergy and laity, break all ties with the Calvinists and form their own synod, the Minor Reformed Church of Poland, aka the Polish Brethren. And 463 years later, the consequences of those events still affect our lives and our faith. Peter Ganesius was born in 1525 to a peasant family, became a monk, graduated from the University of Krakow in 1546, was ordained to the priesthood, and in 1550 he represented the Catholic position in a debate against the Reformation. So in 1551, his bishop sent him to Italy to attend the University of Padua, where in 1554 he graduated with a doctorate in theology and was appointed to the faculty. And it's in Italy that he was exposed to some very radical new ideas. And in 1555, after lecturing in defense of the anti-Trinitarian theologians Michael Servetus, who you may have heard of, and Matteo Gribaldi, he was dismissed from the university. I know you got all those dates. There will be a test later. He converted to the Protestant faith, returned to Poland, and his story picks up where we began. Now, the Polish Brethren are an interesting bunch. They were Socinians, named for the Italian theologian Fausto Zozzini. They rejected the views of Orthodox Christian theology on many points, including the doctrine of the Trinity, the divinity of Christ, and the very idea of original sin. And even more radically for the times, Gonesius claimed that true belief resided with the authority of the laity, and that individual conscience superseded that of civil authority, which was also pretty much religious authority at the time. He opposed the feudal system and serfdom, in spite of which he managed to retain the patronage of at least one member of the nobility to support him as a pastor. In Britain and North America, Socinianism later became a catch-all term for any kind of dissenting belief. It's pretty much the equivalent of calling somebody an atheist today. The Brethren were pacifists. They were one of the first peace churches. They were against capital punishment, and they advocated the separation of church and state. They taught the equality and brotherhood of all people. They opposed social privileges based on religious affiliation. They refused military service, and they declined to serve in political office. In 1602, the Brethren established the influential Rakovian Academy and Printing Press in Rakow, which spread their ideas across both Western and Eastern Europe via their graduates and their publications. Two overarching principles emerged in the history of the Brethren: reason and tolerance. The tradition of discussing theology was based on the faculty of reason and the democratic process. They emphasized rational discussion in clarifying their beliefs, and even the phenomenon of prophecy had to be interpreted with reason. Their approach to dialogue included propagating ideas via published books and then discussing and debating them at synods. They advocated a non-dogmatic reflection of religion. And although they did not reject authority, they did not agree on who or what could be that authority. Their structure became a peership of equals rather than hierarchical. They emphasized rational thought, critical interpretation of sources, and verification of theoretical claims. This led them to the idea of religious tolerance, as they emphasize reason instead of belief in doctrine or dogma, although their tolerance did have limits. Doesn't that all sound pretty familiar? Their movement was Unitarian, although they didn't identify as such until later, and they precede the Transylvanian churches by a couple of years. So let's zoom out to a bigger historical picture for a moment. This is all taking place roughly 1,000 years after the decline of the Western Roman Empire. Europe has emerged from the Middle Ages and is in the middle of the Renaissance period. Martin Luther had published his 95 Theses 30 years earlier, and the Reformation is fully established in Europe. And then the Counter-Reformation kicks in. The Rakovian Academy was shut down in 1638 under the pretext that several students had allegedly destroyed a roadside cross. The local Catholic bishop forced the closure of the school, and all its buildings were razed. Most of the teaching staff and students went into exile in Transylvania or the Netherlands. And then in 1658, the Polish nobility, who were largely Catholic, banned their religion and expelled the Brethren from Poland. They were given 2 years, very generous, to sell their belongings and move, or they could embrace Catholicism and stay. Most chose to leave, and they scattered. Some to Transylvania, Prussia, a few to England, most to the Netherlands. And they settle in Amsterdam, which is a hotbed of social, political, and religious radicalism. It is in Amsterdam that 2 things happen. First, they take on the label of Unitarian. And second, the leading figures of the movement decide that the works of the theologians and intellectuals connected with the church should be collected and published in one enormous compilation, which they do in 1668 with the publication of Bibliotheca Fratrum Polonorum Quos Unitaros Vocant, or the Library of the Polish Brethren, called Unitarians. In 1674, the book is placed on the Index Librorum Prohibitorum, the list of books prohibited by the Catholic Church. Some Catholic theologians went so far as calling it one of the most dangerous publications to Christianity. And it's listed along with other classics of philosophy, such as Spinoza's Tractatus Theologicus Politicus and Hobbes' Leviathan. Just as a side note, the index was finally suspended on March 29th of 1967. Not that long ago. The Brethren and their published works are considered to have influenced many Enlightenment thinkers, including John Locke, who owned a complete set of all 9 volumes of the Bibliotheca. Isaac Newton, who was privately anti-Trinitarian, also collected many of their works. The Brethren and the Socinian movement certainly informed the development of English Unitarianism. John Biddle, known as the father of English Unitarianism, translated several of their publications into English. And through American Unitarianism, their ideas also influenced many of the founding fathers of the United States. We know that James Madison and Thomas Jefferson attended sermons of their friend and Unitarian preacher, Joseph Priestley, who openly cited the Polish Brethren as influences. So we can trace our presence here in this room today to a bunch of radical Polish Christians who lived and thought and worked 463 years ago, give or take a decade or 2. They were part of a larger rationalist revolt against religion, a broader social reaction taking place, one that embroiled the whole of Europe in religious and political conflict. People fought and died over ideas and beliefs like Arianism and Socinianism, and whether you were Protestant or Catholic. But reason slowly asserted itself, culminating in the Enlightenment 100 years later, and the rise of the democratic nation states. And what triggered that revolt was the invention of the printing press in 1440, which made knowledge available to growing numbers of people. The historian Oswald Spengler wrote that similar movements arose in every civilization in which literacy escapes from the control of the priesthood and a significant secular literate class emerges. And it turns out there have been several ages of reason in the human story. In ancient Egypt, there was one that started around 1500 BCE. In China, around 750 BCE. In both India and Greece, around 600 BCE. In what Spengler called the Magian culture, which was the mix of competing Middle Eastern monotheisms that finally came under the rule of Islam, around 900 CE. The equivalent point in the West was reached around 1650, around the time the Brethren peaked as an organization. And every one of these rationalist revolts passed into history. The rationalist movement of the Egyptian New Kingdom ended in 1340 BCE with the restoration of the traditional faith under the pharaoh Horemheb. That of China ended with the coming of the Qin dynasty in 221 BCE. That of India faded out 100 years later with the renewal of traditional religious philosophy. That of Greece and Rome ceased to be a living force around the beginning of the Christian era. That of the Muslim world ended around 1200 CE. And each of them was followed by what Spengler called the second religiosity, a renewal of religion fostered by an alliance between intellectuals convinced that rationalism had failed and that the masses had never really accepted rationalism in the first place. And the masses that had never really accepted rationalism in the first place. I think what we see happening is happening now in our denomination. Many of our clergy seem to be saying that reason is a tool of oppression, not liberation, and that the Unitarian thread of our heritage has run its course. And maybe it has, but it's not because its ideas are invalid. It's simply because an age of reason is passing, and we are simply left to deal with that fact. But because reason and rationality are no longer a dominant cultural force, doesn't mean they simply go away. It simply means they're no longer dominant. Every literate urban society, Spengler argued, followed the same trajectory from an original folk religion rich in myths, through the rise of intellectual theology, the birth of rationalism, the gradual dissolution of the religious worldview into rational materialism, and then the gradual disintegration of rational materialism into a radical skepticism that ends by dissolving itself. Thereafter, you get ethical philosophies for the intellectuals and resurgent folk religion for the masses that provide the enduring themes for the civilization to come. I believe that what is happening in the West is just as Spengler predicted. On the one hand, we're seeing the consolidation of an educated and more or less wealthy elite with their own social and political philosophies. And on the other hand, rising fundamentalist ethno-nationalism, populism. A multiplicity of social, political, religious movements are arising, some progressive, most are reactionary. What is certain is that we are in a time of change as dynamic and as uncertain as the time of the Brethren. Like them, we do not know what will arise from the social forces boiling around us. They could not have predicted the Enlightenment. Those forces will move with a logic or illogic all their own. An old order is fragmenting and falling away, and a new one is a long way from coalescing out of the increasing chaos. New myths will be born, and trying to control myths is a fool's errand. One of the lessons of the Polish Brethren is that institutions are not necessary for ideas to thrive and spread. Despite the destruction of their academy and their expulsion from Poland, their ideas survived to influence greater movements. Like the brethren, what we can do is keep the faith. Faith is the normal and necessary human response to those things that cannot be known on the basis of any form of proof, but have to be answered in one way or another in order to live in the world. The question that deserves discussion is, why keep our faith? And I believe that the answer is that every act of faith rests on a set of values. We have a set of values that have survived through some 500 years or more, and I believe can survive through at least 500 more if we hold true to them. Reason and tolerance may go in and out of fashion, but they never go out of style. May it be so. Our closing words come to us from John O'Donohue. At the end of the year, the particular mind of the ocean filling the coastlines longing with such brief harvest of elegant vanishing waves is like the mind of time opening us to shapes of days. As this year draws to its end, we give thanks for the gifts it brought and how they became inlaid within where neither time nor tide can touch them. The days when the veil lifted and the soul could see delight, when the quiver caressed the heart in the sheer exuberance of being here. Surprises that came awake in forgotten corners of old fields when expectations seemed to have quenched. The slow, brooding times when all was awkward and the wave in the mind pierced every sore with salt. The darkened days that stopped the confidence of the dawn. Days when beloved faces shone brighter with light from beyond themselves, and from the granite of some secret sorrow, a stream of buried tears loosened. We bless this year for all we learned, for all we loved and lost, and for the quiet way it brought us nearer to our invisible destination.